Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to share something different about myself that I don't usually share with others. So this is great.
Yes. So just to let some of our audience members know, Rudy and I met when we were both living in Nebraska. We were both in grad school, and I went back through my emails and I saw an initial email I sent you where I was introducing myself and just letting you know about the Latina Grad Student
That's right.
Association.
That's right.
That was back in 2014.
Yeah, I was trying to
Yeah.
remember too, and I was like, oh, I didn't even realize you had founded that program when I started grad school. I saw your name. I was like, why did I never know that? And I was part of the group. So I was so excited to see your name again when you invited me to do this.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I know that back then was when I know I didn't have a chance to get to know Mac too well,
Mhm.
but was that when you had met Mac, your husband?
So yeah, we were long distance dating at that time when I was in grad school. And I think my choice to go to Nebraska might have rubbed off on him because he actually eventually, once I graduated, he went up there to do his own graduate studies and get his master's degree. So it must have been a
Yeah.
nice place for him to visit when we were long distance in a long distance relationship and he decided to go. So I went back and spent a few more years there, but this time as a spouse of a graduate student. So but yes,
Yeah.
yeah, we knew each other at that time we were dating.
Speaking of Mac, I want to start with our first question, which is what has it been like being a spouse and mother in a family where ADHD is part of daily life? Because I know that just for our audience to know, Mac, your husband, is the one who has ADHD.
That's right. Yeah. And to give a little background info on it, he was actually late diagnosed. So he was diagnosed in 2021, and that was deep in our parenting journey. So we had just had our second born. And so imagine all the changes and challenges that you're having as a parent already. And then add in two children that need you, two under two at the time, it was two under two. And then on top of that, COVID was coming at that bookend of it. And then
Yeah.
being on that, having that challenge, and then the pressures of just normal parenting on a young couple and add on to that this new diagnosis. And at the time, he was also finishing his PhD.
Mm.
So there was a lot happening in our house. And yeah, so it was a lot. But I think that's come with its own benefits and blessings and strengths. The fact that he was diagnosed when he was, because we've been able to get so many just skills and tools in our toolbox as a family to help him as well. And he came out stronger on the other end. So not only did he graduate with his doctorate, he's gone on to do a bunch of awesome research projects, and not only that, but he's just an awesome dad. And so I think that all of that put together, along with being an awesome spouse, I think that it all comes together with that diagnosis of ADHD, even if it did come when it did. I think yeah, it's been a journey. I'll just leave it at
Yeah,
that.
definitely. I think that often what shows up is that when it comes specifically within the BIPOC community, just thinking
Mhm,
about our backgrounds as Latinas and growing up within that culture is there's a lot of stigma around mental health. And then
mhm,
sometimes that can also lead to being underdiagnosed as a population.
mhm,
Just even thinking about your own career and your background,
mhm.
I remember you were part of the Child, Youth, and Family Studies
Yes.
program
Mhm,
in grad school. And so just thinking about
mhm,
how understanding that diagnosis and not
mhm,
realizing you have it until you're older can
mhm.
happen a lot, especially within the Latina community.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think a lot of you could probably resonate with some of the words that we would hear from our parents or grandparents of no pasa nada or animate, échale ganas. They all come from a good place of having been raised in immigrant households, having been raised with trauma, going through a bunch of adversity, especially as immigrant families and first generation families. But I think what that does as well is, unfortunately, it minimizes a lot of the problems that we might have, especially with mental health and especially with things like physical health, a broken bone, like that's something else, right? But then when we're talking about the invisible illnesses or the invisible impairments that we might be dealing with, those can be really minimized in our community. And I think that's one of the stigmas that we as a family had to stand up against a bit too, is this is valid, right? This is a real issue, but there is real help out there. And so it's just about asking for help, asking for resources, looking for those resources, Because yeah, we've noticed that there is, I think, underdiagnosis for a lot of especially Latina children. I know people are concerned about medication and maybe over medicating, but I think the real issue is that maybe we're under diagnosing children that could really well need some help. And our eldest, not to really switch gears here, but our eldest, we suspect that he might have, not only because we know ADHD is genetic, but because of my husband's recent diagnosis, it's very forefront in our mind. And so there's just a lot of things that we notice about how he is and how he behaves and how he self-regulates and things like that that we've noticed, right? And so right now we've been proactive because we don't want to have that same cycle, right, of minimizing a potential illness and hopefully helping him have the tools that he needs to be successful. He's going to be 5 in September. And so this is a perfect age, right, to catch it and to help him get through it. And so we are on a wait list for a pediatrician who diagnoses. And right now, in our efforts to be proactive, we've been doing PCIT, parent-child interactive therapy, and that has helped.
Can you tell us more about that?
I think so. I've been new to it. We're new to it as well. So that came up as a potential behavioral help for our kid while we wait for this diagnosis, right? And even if he doesn't have ADHD, it's been helping with some behavioral regulations, emotional regulating. He is pretty hyperactive. He is big body play. Everything is very intense, even high emotions. It can be high, like anger, anxiety. He can be very happy and he is still very with his body, if that makes you can very intense with his body. Everything is very high energy, very high tension. And so what PCIT has helped us do is that it's not the child with a therapist, it's us with our child, and the therapist is watching and talking in our ear and engaging us with our child in play, which has been great for both of us because we get to watch each other. So I watch my husband and he watches me, and we can really pinpoint our strengths, especially him with ADHD, right? So my husband can pinpoint his own natural strengths as a parent with ADHD and how he's engaging our child in that. And so PCIT, he's actually graduating from PCIT in a couple.
Oh, yay! That's so exciting.
We did it through the summer. And so what we start out is with a child-led play. So we let him lead us in play and we just follow along. And then the second component of therapy is parent-led. So we start asking him commands, we start telling him to do these things. And then there's obviously consequences if he doesn't. And so we just go through that cycle. And so now we can incorporate some of those commands and some of that parent-child-led stuff into our home. And so he just, I think, just feels much more in tune with himself. He has learned some good words about, Mama, I feel like my body is too wiggly and I want to hit something. And so
I
then
love that he can communicate that.
It's beautiful to watch because then we're like, okay, what do we need? And we have things like, we have the therapy swing for him to swing back and forth to help regulate. When that doesn't work, we have punching balls. He's in martial arts. That has helped tremendously with focus. And like I said, even without an actual diagnosis, we've seen a difference in how he just engages with the world and with his peers as well. And with his little sister, because we have another child that hasn't shown signs yet, and or any at all. And so it's just important for us to have that, for them to have that relationship and have that stability in the house.
That's so wonderful that y'all were able to be capable of having access to this resource of PCIT and learning more about how to interact with him and what's going to support him and help him be able to know how to communicate those emotions, whether he has ADHD or not, right? Because we don't know yet about the diagnosis. What we do know is PCIT is useful for parent-child interactions in general, regardless of what the diagnosis will be. So I think that's so awesome that then also you and Mac get to see each other and see what are those strengths coming out as parents.
The really cool tidbit too is because we are bilingual and because of our just familial history, we did ask our therapist, hey, is there any handouts in Spanish? Do you know anything about this? She actually found out that California has a whole chapter on PCIT that it has completely just everything's in Spanish. So yeah, for anyone who's out there and wants to do the therapy in Spanish, it's out there. And so actually we got the handouts in Spanish and English because we wanted to have the vocabulary to
Mm.
share with our parents, so my child's grandparents, so that then they could start grasping a little bit about what we're dealing with. And
Yeah.
especially because we want him to spend time with his grandparents. And they need to have that relationship and that interaction. But we also want them to understand some of the things that he might be dealing with that might be a little different than how they raised us or what they did in certain situations, when the wiggles hit or when he just needs to stim. Sometimes stimming is really big for him. He just needs to twirl around a little bit and you might be in the middle of a grocery store. How do I deal with that? And so that, yeah, overstimulation is huge for my son. And yeah, so just having the vocabulary of how to even translate PCIT or how to even translate what ADHD is, having just the words can help,
Yeah.
I think, too. And that's been building really good, powerful connections with his grandparents because then they get to know him in a deeper level and who he really is.
Yeah, that's so awesome that you were able to get access to that resource that is in Spanish. Because,
Mm-hmm.
yes, when we're growing up in these bilingual homes,
Mm-hmm.
talking about mental health can be really challenging. Being able to first try to explain what's going on, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that it's not que no pasa nada aquí,
Mm-hmm.
but rather there's different things we can do to support each child because they all
Mm-hmm.
have different unique personalities, but also they all bring different strengths and areas of growth. And so
Yeah.
having a resource that is in Spanish, but then also in English can help include the whole family. I think that's so
Mm-hmm.
wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's changing. It changes the thinking. It's always about breaking that cycle. And I think that everyone is capable of that. And I think that we've seen it time and time again when it's the new generation. And so it's okay. It's a different understanding than what we might have had as children or might have seen as children. It's a lot of work, but it's very gratifying on the other end is to see
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you can hold on to the pieces that are so gratifying because,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it is definitely a lot of work. I remember learning about PCIT during like my graduate training,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't specifically do it, but I would see some other interns doing it. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, like there's a lot of steps and a
Mm-hmm.
lot of involvement with the parents. And it's so great that you can do it with the little mic in your ear. So then
Yes.
that way they help guide you.
Yes, because you worry at the beginning. I very much was like, what if me talking to my husband, what if you're better at this than I am? Then I'm going to feel awful. And he was thinking the same
Mhm.
thing. And we were like, oh, we're going to be watching each other do this and that. And we've gotten to the point where even just last week we had a session and I was like, this feels very natural. I told the therapist, I just felt
Mm.
very in tune with play. And that was cathartic for me as the eldest and of a first generation family where I had to grow up pretty quickly and take care of the
Mm.
younger ones. And so suddenly it was like me playing with my child felt like this cathartic, powerful moment of me actually engaging in play and having fun, like real
Yeah.
fun was really nice. And I just had that sort of epiphany last week of this isn't just for my son, this is for me too. Like I'm feeling the connection with my inner child in these moments when I'm letting him lead and I'm letting him make the decisions for me and I'm just playing along and following along with the storyline in his imagination. So it's been
Yeah.
very powerful. Yeah, I would
Yes.
recommend it.
Yeah, for sure. I can't speak from experience because I don't have any kids, but I have heard from my friends who are parents that
Mhm.
kids will like having your own kids will definitely teach you a lot about some of your own triggers, but then also
Mm,
can be very healing because you
mhm,
start to remember your own childhood and being able to engage in play. I think that's so helpful, especially as adults, because we don't really spend a lot of time
mm-mm,
playing. And you brought up such a great point about being the eldest in
mhm,
your family. I think I myself, as an eldest too, like being the
mhm,
oldest daughter within a Latina family, sometimes, especially when they're immigrants, can lead us to grow up really fast. And that can be really challenging because
mhm.
while, yes, we value family and we want to support them, sometimes then we didn't get the chance to allow ourselves to rest and play and be creative. So I'm so
Mhm.
happy that it's been healing for you too.
Yeah, very much. Yeah. And I think that I hope that my son's knowledge and like visual of me doing that with him and him remembering that we did this together, hopefully can break another cycle of being the eldest and in his case being the eldest
Mm,
son, right? In a Latino
yeah.
family. And what other cycles can we break there that we might not even realize we're maybe festering or we're coming about, even though we are few generations behind immigration, but still there's always the familial cultures, the familial connections and what can change.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I hope that he also Hopefully someday he'll look back and say, oh, I remember doing that with you. That was fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe you can share this episode with him when he gets
Right?
older.
You never know. You never believe what we did.
Yeah, definitely. I heard you mention something that I was curious about a little
Yeah.
earlier. You mentioned, I think, a therapy swing. Was that right?
Yeah, we saw that it's a lot for we saw it mainly come up on, I think it was a social media platform, but it was for, I think, primarily people who have autism or are on the spectrum. But
Hmm.
we were like, that might help him because we realized in the middle of, I think he was having, this was before therapy. My son was having a terrible tantrum. Something was going on. He could not vocalize his emotions, and we could not calm him down with everything that we knew up until that point that would help.
Mm.
Nothing was helping. And he was to the point where he was turning red. Like, we'd never seen him this agitated. And I think Mac, my husband, picked up a blanket and just curled him in it like a baby and just
Yeah.
hugged him to him, like just to his body.
Mm.
And it was like within 5 seconds, it was instantaneous, quiet. It was just soothing to him, I think. And so we were like, oh, we need to look up how to mimic this because this is nice. And so
Ah,
we found that there's a therapy swing. So you could hook it into the ceiling, but I think in our case, our house doesn't have that stability. So we hooked it on a equipment thing that goes over the doorway, like one of those, yeah, pull up equipment. So we just hung it on one of those. And so he can go in there and just, it made out of material that kind of, it molds to your body. So
mm,
just you step in and it just folds into you. And so
mm,
he just swings in it when he needs, or sometimes we'll have to prompt him. It's like, maybe it's
mm.
time to go to your swing. Like,
Yeah.
how about some swing time? When, we can see he's getting a little built up and he can't communicate with us about his needs. So it was just, maybe let's just try the swing for a little bit. So, and usually it's one of those things where he can go on his own, or we can go and sit with him while he swings. We can push him a little bit or talk to him while he's rocking. That helps him regulate a little bit. So we've had a lot of positive experiences with the swing, and we just got it on Amazon. So yeah, if anybody's looking for, I think therapy swing is technically the name for it, but they're very nice. And I think they help even grown-ups.
I was thinking that too. I was like, I wonder if they have one for adults
I'm
because
sure they do.
if like we as adults struggle communicating
I
how we
know.
feel when our emotions start to feel overwhelming,
A
that we
hundred
need
percent.
breaks
A
too.
100%. So,
Yeah.
yeah, 100%. So I think if we can all just find a swing to cocoon ourselves in the middle of the day, that would be great.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So we love it. It's been really helpful to have the swing. And like I said, we enrolled him in martial arts, and having that healthy outlet to
Yeah.
move his body in the way that he just wants to move it at home, where jumping on a bed and a couch turns into movement and peer interaction and a good relationship with his coach. And so that's not saying that jumping on bed or jumping on a couch isn't good when we didn't need it to happen, but I think that having a place to safely do it and
Hmm.
to learn the discipline of the sport is very helpful to him too, that there's a time and place for hitting, and it's not just because you're angry, or it's not just because you're really happy and excited. Yeah, it's not okay to hit others. And so it's
Yeah.
just helping him become aware of his body and what his body can do and how powerful he is. Yeah, lately every day
Yeah.
he's, Mama, look at my muscles. It's like,
Oh,
you've been working really hard.
that's so adorable. That is
So it's
awesome.
building his self-esteem, which is another thing that I think
Yeah.
ADHD folks have, is they're very sensitive to negative feedback because they grow
Hmm.
up being put in this box, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we've noticed about my son, is he's very sensitive to negative
Mm.
feedback. And recently, I think, especially, I think it's that connected to his age, where he's almost 5 and self-esteem's taking a hit these days. He's really
Mm.
putting himself down with his words the other day, and I said, no, you're not a loser. No, like, what,
Oh.
I was confused. I was like, where's this talk coming from? I didn't realize with my background that it started so early, but we think that in conjunction with this potential diagnosis, that maybe it's compacting a little bit. We had to we talked to his therapist, and it sounds like we have to start some some good, strong affirmations for him every day, which are good for
Yeah.
anybody. So let's all tell
Yes.
ourselves in the mirror that you're good, you're strong, you're wonderful. So it's about being intentional for us and for me, because it's so hard sometimes for me to just put the words out there, right? Like, I have to feel like they feel natural. And so sometimes I struggle with that. But this is
Mm.
teaching me, right, to talk to myself better too, because I'm modeling for my children.
Yeah.
And so again, here's that healing process where in the process of helping my son feel better, I'm healing myself. So it's about practicing those affirmations with each other
Hmm.
sometimes. So yeah, so with him, it's been that self-esteem And so that's another reason
Yeah.
why we've noticed that maybe we have a diagnosis coming up. But
Yeah, that would
yeah,
make
yeah,
sense. I'm
yeah.
so glad to hear that you're able to practice those affirmations and just reflecting like how as adults we benefit so much from them too. And if we're able to start ingraining that in kids, then
Mm,
it makes it so that as he gets older,
mhm.
that he will be able to access those affirmations a little bit sooner, a little bit quicker, and build that habit for himself to practice that self appreciation, knowing that sometimes self esteem can take a dip depending on what's going
Yeah.
on. Just thinking about like child development, there's just so many
Mhm.
stages, so many hormones moving around.
So
So,
much happening in little bodies, and their
yeah,
brains are just trying to catch up.
yeah, definitely.
So,
So, I have one final question for
sure.
you. What advice would you give other folks that are trying to navigate being in a Latine neurodivergent familia?
Oh, man. I I think it's leaning in towards the strengths, right? Because I think
Mm,
ADHD folks, and I'm thinking of my husband here specifically, I think they you grow up with peers and you might get put in a box, right? Like you don't
yeah.
typically belong, you shouldn't belong in, because I have learned so much from my husband and friends that I have who are diagnosed as well. And even among themselves, I just see so many strengths and differences and unique personality traits that I just find so endearing and so valuable to life. And I'm just thinking about, for example, like my husband has the strength as having ADHD of finding connections where they're not always visible to a neurotypical person. He can find the connections between people, between things, projects. He can find connections with anything and bring them together in seamless, amazing ways. And him having his diagnosis actually was able to catch my son his eyesight issues. So he
Mm,
wears glasses, and I had no idea. I hadn't noticed anything, but my husband having ADHD was able to kind of pinpoint on certain mannerisms that my son was having. And he's like, I think we
yeah.
need to get his eyesight checked. And sure enough, he needed glasses. And in a relationship, I think that's another thing that I would tell people is lean into your relationship with the person. If you're in a neurodiverse relationship, like lean into your person. I have learned so much about myself by being with Mac, and he tells me that he's the gas. He's the gas in our relationship. He's just gonna pump and go. He's gonna go. Let's just
Hmm.
do this. He knows when to make decisions. He's capable of that. And he says that I'm the one that grounds him. So I remind him to
Mm,
slow down a bit, pump the brakes. Let's talk about this for a second.
yeah.
And so I think now that we've leaned into this, we can mesh that better instead of fighting against it. We're like, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this, right? And that's been the thing throughout our relationship is that he's been the spontaneous, let's go on this crazy date person. And I was always like, why? Like, we had no plans to do this. Where is this coming from? And he just has this urge of adventure and the sense of just finding fun anywhere. And I think that his brain gives him that capacity. And
Yeah.
so for me, it's been my job to guard his heart and guard his emotions, because ADHD tends to take a hit against people emotionally
Yeah.
and also attacks their character in society,
Mm,
where we're over here trying to break cycles, like I said, as a Latina couple, where machismo was huge growing up.
mm,
And then you lean into this where he might forget to clean something, or he might forget a task because his brain took him somewhere else and something
mm,
didn't get finished. And I have had to learn that this is his brain processing. This has nothing to do with machismo or laziness or whatever else that was ingrained in me as a Latina
mm.
woman. And so it's a lot of trust building, and a lot of some couples therapy if you would like to. It's always that's
Yeah.
another one I would suggest if you are
Yeah.
in a relationship with someone who has ADHD, is lean into these, because yeah, your brain can make you think things about a person, because that's how you were raised and that's what's been ingrained.
Yeah.
And now I see him as his brain just doing what it's doing naturally. And he
Mm,
does take medication and it does help, but then he also needs someone to lean on, and he just needs his people in his corner. And I think that's
yeah.
what everybody with ADHD needs, is someone an understanding family, partner, whatever it is that you have in your life. I think that's another thing that I would highly recommend to people is find your community. And I always love talking about this because this is a new identity for me, is being
Yeah.
in a neurodiverse family. So I'm always happy to be that person for anybody out there. I am learning as I go too. So it's
Hmm.
very nice and very challenging and rewarding. So
Yeah, thank you so much, Rudy. Those are such
Yeah.
great suggestions and advice that I agree with wholeheartedly. So thank you so much for being on the
Yeah.
Latina ADHD
I
podcast,
loved
and
it.
I hope you have a good rest of your day. It was such a pleasure to be able to catch up and talk with Rudy and hear about her experiences in being part of a Latina neurodiverse family. I hope that her story will inspire others who are navigating very similar situations to reach out for that help, that support, and access whatever resources you may need. As a reminder, this podcast is not a replacement for therapy. And if you are a company or organization who is looking for a speaker or consultant to be able to speak on topics related to Latina mental health and ADHD, you can reach out to me at contact at jcpsychologicalservices.com. Or if it's easier, you can go to my website at www.drjanicestro.com.